Hi, my name's Ben Slater and I'm the Director and Principal Social Worker here at Nelly Supports. We've been asked a question. I thought I'd spend a few minutes just trying to answer this question for people. The question is what to expect in a testamentary capacity assessment. Now, testamentary simply means the capacity to write your will. Now, this is the only decision that we assess in the UK that really doesn't fall under the Mental Capacity Act 2005. It comes under a piece of case law called Banks versus Goodfellow. And what Banks versus Goodfellow says is that the testator, the person writing their will, needs to understand what a will is and its effects. They need to understand the extent of their estate, so how much money have they got. They need to understand the moral obligations and the decisions within the will. And then they can't have an illness that perverts their sense of right or prevents their natural faculties from creating the will. So what to expect within our assessment is a conversation. It's not a test. We're not going to sit there with a pen and paper marking little tick boxes saying she's passed that bit, he passed this bit. What we're going to do is have a conversation with you about what you have. What are your assets? Do you own 3 houses and a car? Do you own a house and you've got £50 million in the bank? So we need to evidence in our report that you understand what it is that you have. So we'll talk to you about those things. So if then you can tell us that you own a house and it's worth £240,000 and that you own 2 villas in Spain at £300,000 each, and that you've got £100,000 in cash assets in the bank, that's fantastic. We'll also then make sure that you can understand the value of those things. What we don't want to see is where you're saying, I own a house that's worth £150,000 and that if I sold it, I could then go and buy 3 Kit Kats and a Mars bar. You need to be able to evidence that you actually understand the true value of what you have. So once you've done that, we'll then start talking to you about what you're putting in your will. Who are you distributing all of these things to? Are you leaving it to your son, your daughter, both? Is it equal that you're going to be leaving those things? Are you leaving more to one person than another? And if so, we need to evidence why you're doing that so we can show your logical thought process behind why you're making these decisions. If you've already written a will and you're leaving somebody out of it, leaving somebody out of your new will, should I say, then what we'll do is we'll discuss the reasons why you're leaving that person out. Just so then if it's contested, we can evidence that you understood why the reasons why you're leaving that person out and why you've changed your will. And it's really important for a judge or anybody else in the future to be able to identify your reasoning and your logical thought process behind those decisions that you're making within your will. We also need to consider your moral obligations. So most people would say that if you have children, you have a moral obligation to provide to those children. That doesn't mean that you have to provide to those children, but you have to have considered that and give reasoning why you're leaving one child out over another. From there, we have to evidence that you have no illness that perverts your sense of right. So that could be something like schizophrenia may be impacting on your decision making, or even dementia could be impacting on your decision making. For instance, we had one client that didn't want to leave anything to her daughter because her daughter had been replaced by a robot. That was her illness perverting her sense of right. That would then suggest that she didn't have testamentary capacity. So we'll talk about things like that. Now, talking about testamentary capacity is never a nice thing to do because we are talking about death at the end of the day. But we talk about that openly and honestly with you. So we will talk about what happens when you pass away. We may talk about what you would like to happen at your funeral. So we can record those additional elements. They're not required for testamentary, but we think it's important to record those. We'll also talk about your beneficiaries and what would happen if one of those beneficiaries passed away. Because then we need to consider, if a beneficiary passes away, what happens to the gift that they leave. Now, not only is that important for your will and for your will writer, but it's also important to evidence that you've thought about those things and that you've considered the implications within the will. So realistically, what will happen in your testamentary capacity assessment is a conversation. It'll be kind and therapeutic. We will try our very hardest not to upset you, but they are difficult conversations, and we do that as kindly as we possibly can.